All right, we are live. Mike, why don't you get us started and unmute?
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. And welcome to the January 26th CTE committee meeting. My name is Mike DiGiacomo, and today our objective is to provide you with an update on the CTE committee plan due to the Accountability and Implementation Board, March 15th, 2023, and to hear from our partners at the Maryland State Department of Education. The agenda and presentation are available on our website at gwdb.maryland.gov under the CTE Committee tab. A reminder that this meeting is being live streamed. We encourage you to send any questions or recommendations for the CTE committee members to our email account at dlcte-labor@maryland.gov. And at this time, I would like to turn the meeting over to CTE Committee Chair Myra Norton for some opening remarks. Myra?
Thank you, Mike, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're looking forward to this live public committee meeting. We're going to cover a couple things. First, we'll go through a brief update in terms of where we are on developing the draft implementation plan to submit to the AIB. And then we're really excited to have a number of folks with us from the Maryland State Department of Education to talk about the work that's already being done around CTE and CCR. So that will be the bulk of our meeting today, and then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. So really pleased to have all of you with us. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Allie and Bob to talk about the kind of where we are on the CTE implementation plan.
Thank you so much, Myra. I want to start by welcoming the members of our committee and our guests, and a special welcome to our new committee members, Secretary Wu of the Department of Labor and Secretary Anderson of the Department of Commerce. And we look forward to welcoming the new Secretary of Higher Education once that is announced. So planning is well underway. In partnership with the Jacob Francis Institute of the University of Baltimore, as well as the Urban Institute. We have been conducting interviews. Members of the CTE committee have been interviewed to gather their insight and their vision. Legislators who were key to shaping the blueprint, and local CTE directors are currently who we are interviewing. We have conducted 18 interviews so far, with 30 total scheduled. Our next phase will be speaking with families, students, CTE educators, and community members. We are also in the process of conducting research for comparable programs and best practices, and as well as collecting current data to get a picture of what CTE looks like throughout the state of Maryland. We are submitting drafts to the committee throughout the process for rolling feedback. You can expect a comprehensive draft in early March, and the final plan will be submitted to the AIB by March 15th. Bob, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I just want to compliment Allie for doing such great work and keeping us organized and arranging all the meetings. A lot of the interviews have already been quite instructive. I know I've learned a good deal from them so far, and we have many to go, but we're well on our way. I do think we, in addition to all of the outline that we laid out before, we are going to try to address what are the key challenges to achieve these ambitious goals. and some suggestions for overcoming them. But let's be clear, this goal has not been accomplished in any other state. And so this will be quite a breakthrough if it can happen.
Thank you so much, Bob. And this has been a beautifully collaborative effort throughout the state with lots of representation from all corners of the state, a variety of different demographics and geographical representation as well. So it's very exciting to see this all come together. I'm going to pass it over now to the MSDE team, who will be helping us get a picture of what CTE looks like in the state of Maryland currently.
Great. Thank you so much, Allie. And thank you, CTE committee for this time. My name is Dr. Deanne Collins. I'm the Deputy State Superintendent here at MSDE for the Office of Teaching and Learning. And I bring you greetings on behalf of State Superintendent, Mr. Mohammed Chaudhry, who's also a member of the CTE committee. But today, as a team, Team MSDE, we're going to be presenting some information to you. So joining me today, I have Mr. Phil Lasser, Ms. Chandra Haslett, Mr. Justin Dayhoff from MSDE. And then we also have joining us, we're super excited, from Washington County Public Schools, Dr. Gary Willow. He is the Associate Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. And towards the end of our presentation, Dr. Willow will just share specific information related to apprenticeships and what's happening in Washington County. So we will go ahead and get started. Next slide. So we're going to start with a deep dive into Perkins. Then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about apprenticeships and CTE data. Then to sort of round out and close our presentation, we'll talk about college and career readiness pathways, but we'll specifically focus on apprenticeships and what's called out in the blueprint as the vision and expectations. We'll share some student experiences, student examples, and spotlights. And then, as I mentioned, we will close out with Washington County. So we hope to provide you with some great information that will be exciting to you around for the CTE committee and those who are watching. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Dayhoff to get us started.
Well, thank you, everybody. So we're going to start the conversation, like Dr. Collins said, with this deep dive on Perkins, which is now known as the Perkins 5 program. Phil, if you could go ahead to the next slide. What we refer to as Perkins, though, actually has a much longer name. So just for clarity in its current authorization, Perkins 5 refers to the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. This reauthorization was signed in July of 2018. In total, across the country, it provides just under $1.3 billion specifically for CTE programs. Perkins 5 and the reauthorization piece, as it indicates, are not the first iteration of this legislation. And so the most recent reauthorization takes a special focus on student subgroup populations, particularly English learners and students experiencing homelessness, and incorporating them explicitly into the federal statute and provisions guiding the program. Funds typically can be used for a range of activities, and so this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but just to give an example of the types of spending that can occur with Perkins funding, will be funding to help prepare students for high skill, high wage, and demand occupations, to help support partnerships. Perkins funds span both K-12 and higher education, right? So these can support partnerships among secondary schools, post-secondary institutions, degree granting institutions, local workforce development and investment boards, as well as business intermediaries as well. And then, of course, the overall funding can also be used for increasing employment opportunities, particularly for populations who are chronically either unemployed or underemployed, as well as, again, targeting funding for special populations who may require additional support for career attainment, like individuals with disabilities, individuals from economically disadvantaged, those who are out of workforce, and others. How much do we receive? So it's $1.3 billion across the country, but what does that look like here in Maryland? And so what we've noted here is that over the last several years in total, we received about $75 million. Obviously, that's not the same every year. That's not what we get each year. In total, we get about 19 million per year. Fiscal year 22 is the most recent one we have on here. Just a reminder, I should note, these are all federal fiscal years. So these data here reflect the October 1 to September 30 fiscal year, not the state fiscal year. Enrollment for these so how the $1.3 billion gets divvied up across the states is based on federal calculated enrollment eligibility. The federal government uses census data to do that. It's based on the number of students aged 5 to 17 years old who meet this certain circumstances in the given federal fiscal year that they're looking at. If you could go to the next slide, Phil. Within our Perkins allocation, it's further subdivided for different types of programs and purposes. And so let's take our federal fiscal year 22 allocation as an example. So in total, we received $19.6 million. That gets divided into three main buckets, if you will. The first bucket is for local formula funds. These essentially, we can think about these as pass-through, if you will. These are the Perkins formula calcs that go out to both local school systems as well as to post-secondary institutions. Within that 85% of our total, which amounts to about 16.7 million, it's further split. So it is also pretty formulaic in how we determine what of that goes to higher ed, what goes into secondary. And secondary here, I'm referring to secondary schools in K-12. 65% go into LEAs for their programs, 35% to post-secondary programs. In addition to that, if we could go to the next slide, I believe. The state leadership funds are funds for which the department has some additional discretion, though not entirely, because there are pretty strict parameters around how and in what way these funds are to be deployed and utilized. And so there are, again, buckets within buckets on this. And so we have MSD directed grant programs, which are just under $1 million. Our CTE affiliate grant program is about $500,000 each year. And then 2% of the total Perkins award has to go to individuals in state institutions. That's split across two groups. Again, within that, it's a 65-35 split, 65% of that, about $300,000 going toward correctional institutions, 35% or $86,000 going towards juvenile justice facilities. In addition to that, the state leadership funds also, and again, this is a feature of Perkins 5, have a special allocation for special population recruitment, as well as recruitment in non-traditional field training and employment. One more slide, please. How these funds get distributed out to LEAs is largely, as I said, formulaic. And so we looked at that high level just a second ago. In terms of what we have in actual dollars in federal fiscal year 22. But overall, the way that these funds are calculated for the secondary recipients, so I'm talking about K-12 specifically here, 30% of that's based on the number of 5 to 17-year-olds who reside in a particular school district, divided by the total number of 5 to 17-year-olds who reside in all school districts in Maryland. The bulk of it, though, 70% of the calculation is based on 5 to 17-year-olds who live in a school district, but who are from families who are at or below poverty level. Again, divided by that total enrollment. The calculation is a little different for post-secondary, for our community colleges. That's based on the number of individuals in approved CTE programs who are Pell Grant recipients, divided by the total number of individuals in all approved CTE programs in the state who are Pell Grant recipients. If we could go one more. These funds follow a pretty cyclical process each year in terms of the timing and distribution of the funds and the execution of the programs themselves. These typically begin in February, and we're gearing up here now to release the fiscal year, our state fiscal year 23 applications. And so we'll release those in February, as well as additional estimates for what the allocations are for each system. We get those initial estimates from the feds to further clarify what those amounts are going to be in March and April. And that's where we break those out by the mandated bucketing, if you will, in law, and split the funds according to federal rules and how and in what ways those need to be spread across those different portions. Our applications are typically due back from local education agencies in May and June, at which point we are near final in terms of knowing, again, what the allocations are by school system, what's driving the enrollment and the formula for those school systems. And so we typically will review those and we'll also release our state leadership grant processes in May and June for the coming year. And then in July, we actually get our official allocation. So that's when we receive the ability to draw down on federal funds. It's not the full amount, right? It comes in installments. So our first increment is about 40% of the total Perkins Award for the year. But that's when we essentially initiate our notices of grant award. That's the process whereby school systems can begin spending the funds and requesting reimbursement for those funds. Given the timing and the release of the first increment in July and not having the official amount, the end of July is actually when we first start to get narrative reports from our local education agencies for spending, as well as to coincide with previous fiscal year grants in their applications. And then programming begins. So summer programming can start throughout August and then throughout the next year. Meanwhile, in the fall, while the local education agencies are off and running with their program, we're actually already starting the closeout process for the previous federal fiscal year's program. So there's always a little bit of a leapfrog that happens because of the difference between the state fiscal year and the federal fiscal year, and that gets wrapped up in the fall. Interim reports are due to us in January. We also send our consolidated annual reports, our CARs, to the Department of Education in January. And then Phil, if you could swing over to the next slide here. That rounds out in totality our funding cycle each year. What do we do with the money? And more importantly, what do school systems do with the money? What can they do with the money? So there are several requirements associated with the federal Perkins program. Generally speaking, Perkins dollars, as with other federal resources, are subject to supplement, not supplant provisions. This means that they can't take these funds and swap out federal funds for something that they were already spending and using local or state funds on. There is a maintenance of effort provision as well in this, that continues for grant recipients. No funds for CTE programs are to go to students prior to the middle grades. The only caveat to that is that the funds, let's say, a school or a school system, let's say K-8, for example, might be purchasing equipment to be used associated with their middle grade students. There's a chance that, elementary grade students, if they're sharing a building because it's K-8, may have access to that same equipment. So there's a little bit of a carve out and a nuance to that piece. Typically, though, in addition to that, there is a prohibition to help with out-of-state relocation of businesses. This is a special call out in the law, particularly given the relationship and the use of these funds for intermediaries and other industry-aligned work. And then, of course, administrative costs. They're capped at 5%. Administrative costs are the costs that the department can use to fund its staff, for example, who are dedicated to working on and implementing the Perkins program. LEAs also have to have a couple provisions of this. There are minimum allocations to grantees. Those are $15,000. If a local education agency is rural or in a sparsely granted area, there is a process by which there can be a waiver for that. On the post-secondary side, community college grantees must receive an allocation of greater than $50,000. Similar to local education agencies, there is a waiver process for community colleges, for example, that are in sparsely populated or more rural areas that may not have the local census, or in the case of higher ed, the Pell Grant numbers that would generate an allocation of that $50,000 minimum. Let me go to the next slide, Phil. Thank you. Now, accountability, as with any program, is an essential component of Perkins funding. And so Perkins relies on, in part, federally defined success measures. Those core indicators of performance are different at the high school, or I should say secondary level, middle grades and high school, versus the post-secondary. So at the high school level, this corresponds with the percentage of concentrators, CTE concentrators who graduate high school as measured by the ACGR, the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. It's also associated with CTE concentrator proficiency in state academic standards as measured by now MCAP, previously PARC assessments, as well as the percentage of CTE concentrators who, after they exit, are enrolled in post-secondary education or taking part in participating in advanced training or military service, or are otherwise directly employed. As far as program quality goes, so we have performance, but then we have program quality. So that's the percentage of concentrators who have attained a recognized post-secondary credential, as well as the percent of concentrators who have met state-recognized CTE standards, including assessments that are industry aligned in cases where those are available, appropriate. Last, certainly not least though, another federally defined success measure. These again are success criteria outlined by the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education, are the percentage of CTE concentrators in CTE programs that lead to non-traditional fields. These are fields not typical. This looks different in all of our local education agencies, but our local education agencies are using these funds to dive into important work. And so while it's helpful to talk about this both on a high level and in terms of what we can do with the funds, what's allowable, we're going to take the next couple slides to spotlight 3 of our local education agencies and to highlight some of the work that they're doing, as well as to give an example of the types of programming and work that occur either directly with or in conjunction with Perkins funding. And so Washington County, who again is here today, and Dr. Will will be speaking a little bit later, they have a CTE enrollment of 7,092. Their formula allocation for the LEA is about 375,000. And with their work, some examples of the work that they've done, and again, this is beyond a little bit what Dr. Will is going to be talking about a little later. This is focused specifically on activities associated with Perkins 5 funding, but expanding interactive media production to an additional site, as well as implementing a new diesel tech program, maintaining students involved with the Apprenticeship Maryland program, which of course supports workforce development, as well as increasing awareness of taking and passing industry certifications in apprenticeship, right? So seeing that through to the credential. The other component of this, Washington County has, established a new charge to make sure that they're focusing on increasing dual enrollment in order to support the creation of additional and evolving programs. Another one of our LEAs, Frederick County Public Schools, their allocations slightly more. It's about 415,000, and that, as you could probably imagine, is associated with the larger CTE enrollment. They have 11,321 students who are driving that Perkins 5 funding. And some examples of the work that they're doing is planning for consultation with participating employers on workforce development and mentoring strategies, particularly focusing on increasing youth apprenticeship opportunities. In addition to that, with AP enrollment increasing, they're focusing on increasing professional development resources for instruction, particularly for AP computer science, and increasing access to those programs countywide, including through a 3-course pathway for APCS courses running in all high schools, as well as providing a cyber experience course for those students down the road. And then, of course, focusing on non-traditional enrollment in construction trades. And this speaks also to some of the special population work that the Perkins 5 calls for, where they're establishing a work group with FCPS as well as FCC to jointly work together and establish ways in which the program will ultimately be able to attract and retain student subgroups, including female students who are not typically enrolling or participating, in this case, in construction trades portion of their program and related funding. And once more, another last but not least here, we'll go to our 3rd LEA spotlight, which is Queen Anne's County Public Schools. So their formula allocation is 75,000. They have fewer students enrolled, 914, so just under 3,000. And this is focusing on efforts associated with students with disability. So again, calling attention to some of the Perkins formula work to address and attend to special populations and their participation and engagement in CTE programs. And so having identified students with disabilities as underrepresented in health of bioscience CTE clusters, they're working to both identify those students and provide PD for counselors to make sure that they're having a pipeline to provide these programs for those students. In addition to that, they're working on Project Lead the Way, which is an engineering program, in order to make it both more successful and, again, as I mentioned, Frederick, to attract more female students in this case, in order to also generate interest from students even earlier on. So to build backward and to build that pipeline of interested students who are engaging in and reaching for quality engineering programs as a pathway to 21st century careers. With that, I will turn it over now to one of my colleagues here. I believe Chandra is taking it away. Yes, good. Okay, great. Chandra will be taking it from here, and all yours, Chandra.
I'm happy to be here to present some information to you on apprenticeship and CTE data. This first slide highlights that Maryland has a statewide goal to reach 45% of high school graduates having the apprenticeship and industry credentials when they graduate from Maryland public high schools. And so what that means by the numbers, so in school year 20, oh, you went too fast, go back. In school year 21, there were just over 57,000 graduates. So to meet that 45% goal, 25,840 of these graduates would need to have that apprenticeship or industry credentials. And currently we are just under 7%. So the next slide actually provides a couple of definitions just to set us up to look at the next few data slides. So the CTE concentrator is a student who has completed at least 2 courses in a single career and technical education program of study and enrolled in the 3rd course. That concentrator course, that 3rd course, is identified as part of the program by MSDE. The CTE completer indicates whether the student completed the entire sequence of courses in the Maryland CTE program of study. And by default, any student that is a CTE completer is also a CTE concentrator. The blue box over to the right really just highlights that Maryland has had this 45% goal even before the blueprint with the More Jobs for Marylanders Act and the Career Youth and Public Sector Apprenticeship Act. Those 2 acts established that state goal of 45% of high school students having completed a CTE program of study, earning that industry recognized credential, or completed that registered youth or other apprenticeship. I do want to note that the completion of the CTE program of study is not included in the blueprint goal. Next slide, please. So looking at the percentage of students, some statewide trend data here. So statewide, Maryland students are completing high school as a CTE concentrator or a CTE completer in greater numbers when we look over time. So the far right is the school year 2022. That purple is the percent of high school completers. So those students that completed high school that were also CTE completers is around 26%. We had a higher percent that were the concentrators at 33%. Both of those have improved since that 2018-2019 school years by about 3% each. Next slide. So the next slide highlights the variability across our local school systems. Statewide, we have 26% of high school graduates completing that CTE program of study. But there is variability currently across our LEAs, highlighted here to your right on the chart. And then again, geographically with some groupings by color. Next slide. So Maryland MSDE does understand the importance of data, and we have published a series of dashboards that anyone can access on the Maryland Public Schools website and really drill down into the data. This first set of slides highlight the More Jobs for Marylanders Act and provide some information on those CTE programs. Just looking at these 2 slides here, the one over the right provides an overview to those accessing the dashboards with the definitions. You can see by local education agencies how they are, the progress they are making towards that 45% goal over time. Over to the left provides the high-level snapshots scorecard in regards to the progress, which here looks at 25%. The next slide provides a little bit of a close-up view. I did want to highlight some of the numbers on the bottom that I think are important. If you look at right in the middle, you see that 6.53%. That is the percent of students that have earned that industry credential. And then all the way to the far right, about 0.15% of our students have that apprenticeship. And so if you combine those two together, we are just under 7% at 6.68%. So that gets you to the target from that first slide I presented earlier. The next slide. These are a couple other additional dashboards where folks can really drill down and access information on CTE related programs. This one is a work-based learning dashboard. This looks at students. So first off, work-based learning is an opportunity for all students to have an opportunity to experience information around working. And this does include internships and apprenticeships. So each year, MSDE provides a survey out to students, employers, and work-based learning coordinators. And these slides really look at the participation and some data around the survey responses. One thing I just want to point out, currently we have about 55% of our students that are participating in work-based learning in this slide here. So I think if you look at the pie chart, the gray is not participating. And so you can see all the different areas in which students have an opportunity to participate. The next slide drills into technical skills assessment. So technical skills assessments are locally developed end of course assessments that lead to college credit, or are third-party assessments that lead to a recognized post-secondary credential, which includes that industry recognized certificate or certification, a certificate of completion of an apprenticeship, a license recognized by the state or the federal government, an associate degree as well. So just looking at this slide here, you can drill into by student career cluster that the number of TSA attains by each of those core clusters. And so that purple is the health and sciences, that green is the manufacturing and engineering. And so you're able to kind of see by career cluster or student career cluster where the students are earning TSAs or technical skills assessment. I also just want to conclude we can also look at of all the technical skills assessments that are earned by our students, all the industry credentials. Some of the top ones, about 50% of our students are earning credentials in the health professions, local automotive, transportation technologies, early childhood education and child development, and the local construction trades academy. So those are where our students are earning their industry credentials. And I know this was a high-level overview of some of the data that is available. Hopefully, folks can have an opportunity to drill into it. All of these dashboards provide the opportunity to look at it by year, by local education agency, as well as by gender, race, ethnicity, and different career clusters and programs. And with that, I believe the next person up is Phil.
All right, thank you, Chandra. Right, so with that context of our data and looking at the CTE programs as a whole, we want to take this opportunity to really dive into apprenticeships, as you know, that is one of our big focuses now, and really to expand apprenticeships across the state. So we wanted to talk about what that experience is for the students and for the employers and everyone involved. So starting back at the beginning, in Maryland, youth apprenticeships began in 2015 with a bill that established the pilot program for youth apprenticeships across the state. In that, building off of that bill in 2016, we had two school districts sign up to lead the charge, Frederick County and Washington County. Again, Dr. Will will be able to talk to that a little bit more later as well. And then very soon after that, pilot started in 2016. In 2018, the program was expanded to be a permanent statewide program. All counties, all districts are able to participate, and it became an official CTE program of study with MSDE. And now, as of today, 22 of our 24 districts are participating. And do want to call out before we move on as well that this really is This is one of those activities, one of these programs that cannot exist without strong collaboration, strong partnerships with a number of different organizations. And we have some of those listed on the right here between MSDE, the Department of Labor, all of our districts, our Apprenticeship Training Council, the Youth Apprenticeship Council, Department of Commerce, apprenticeship sponsors and employers, and of course our CTE committee here today as well. So appreciate everyone's work and contributions here. So again, what does this experience really look like for the students, or for the student apprentice who participates here? And there's three main parts here for the program. The first one is that 450 hours of on-the-job training. That's where the student is on the job site with the employer, working, learning new skills, being able to gain those extra skills and knowledge needed to really excel in that profession. For that, the students are paid. They're paid at least minimum wage. And then also the third part here is the related instruction. And this is a classroom setting instruction to help support that knowledge and skill development for the students to really become experts in that job as well. And then going forward, looking at how an employer becomes part of the process, those steps to sign up for the employer. It really is fairly straightforward that the employer or potential employer can work with the navigators from the Department of Labor and fill out a quick online application. And this is, goes over from basic demographic information to defining, what exactly the job is the student apprentice would be participating in and supporting, what are those on-the-job tasks, what are those processes, what is the hourly wage that they will be earning as well. Moving on to step two, again, Department of Labor navigators, as well as coordinators from the school districts, go out and do a site visit to the employer, make sure everything looks safe and, like a good environment for all of our students to work in, as well as ensure that, those jobs, apprenticeships will support all of the students and be a great experience. After that, the application packet gets officially submitted to MATC, our Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council. And after approval there, the apprentice can interview and hire for that position. They are hired just like any other employee. They're not just placed into their positions. They are interviewed and hired as a normal employee. And from there, the apprenticeship can begin. And so the next couple of slides going through some of our different partners and really what are the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved. And so we've got a couple of different groups here that really focus on different areas, starting with MSDE. The Department of Education really is about supporting the LEAs, supporting our school districts in making this a strong experience. So our first step is to review and approve our proposals and applications, the CTE program of study, making sure that all of the supports are there for the students to make sure that they are able to have that related instruction. All of the curriculum for the related instruction is vetted by MSDE as well. And then also ensure that the district has a local advisory board for the apprenticeship, bringing in businesses and workforce development boards and making sure that the apprenticeship program supports those local needs. And then once the program is approved and off the ground, MSDE really moves into that technical assistance and support role, going out to those on the visits to each district, virtual calls as well, lots of convening so all of our districts can work from each other, and ensuring that everyone is successful, as well as supporting the Department of Labor, recruiting employers, and everyone else along the process. Switching over to our LEA responsibilities, the local education agencies, again, their main role really could be summarized as supporting our students. And here, the responsibilities really range from starting with recruiting our students, employers to participate, facilitating that matching process. Again, students are apply and hired as normal employees, but looking for those interests and skill match process, ensuring that the students have those supports, making sure that they are able to still complete all of their other schoolwork and responsibilities, coursework, as well as make sure that they are completing their apprenticeship responsibilities. And then making sure, monitoring that progress, making sure that the student is successful, and if there's any changes that need to be made along the way, the school districts, the school-based personnel as well can support that, and ensure that as well that again, that the employer is facilitating a strong and safe environment. And if there's any visits, the LEI coordinator can support that too. Moving on to the Department of Labor, as could be logical, that the Department of Labor's responsibilities really summarized to supporting the employers. So the Department of Labor recruits and coordinates the employers, make sure that they have the exact information, knowledge that they need to get through the approval process, as well as along every step along the way. One of the big things too is making sure that the occupations of the specific positions the apprentices will be in are apprenticeable. And that's really that ones that require that relevant training to be a strong position there, that, you know, this should not be a position that you can be an expert in after one day, but we want that year-long on-the-job learning to really grow to become a strong expert in that occupation. And with that as well, Department of Labor also maintains all of the database of everyone participating and ensures that, again, safety of the workplace, the employer is properly paying and supporting our students. And lastly, really where the rubber hits the road, our employers are the ones that develop and instruct our apprentices. Again, they interview and hire all of our youth apprentices, pay them minimum wage, instruct those minimum competencies, assign a specific mentor to the student to make sure that they are successful, and also define or set those parameters for that classroom-related instruction. And through all of this, after the apprenticeship wraps up, the employers are encouraged to offer a full-time regular employment to the youth apprentice as well, that we hope those apprentices stay on, if it is a good experience for everyone involved. So switching over how this connects to the blueprint, real quick overview again of the blueprint pillar 3, college and career readiness. We are setting a new college and career readiness standard for what a student should be able to know, what are the skills and knowledge that the student needs to be successful in that first year of college. And after the student meets that CCR standard, they enter into the post-CCR pathways, which include AP or IB, dual enrollment early college, and our CTE programs, including apprenticeships. And that is where we come in here. And also the blueprint, of course, established our CT committee here today. And again, we thank you for the time to talk with everyone today and share all of our information. And again, one of the big things here is that that 45% goal, have the goal that 45% of our high school students complete an apprenticeship or industry credential before they graduate from high school. So reaching towards that, we have had a very quick expansion of youth apprentices, youth apprenticeships across the state over the last couple of years. Going from in 2017-18, starting with just 27 apprentices on the left there, participating in the program, going up to now in this current school year, we have over 450 apprentices that are actively participating this school year. So we are very excited about that quick expansion. On the right as well, the number of employers also grew very quickly from 44 to 368. And what that looks like across the state, we have, again, over 22 of our 24 districts are currently participating. Washington County has over 100 apprentices currently. Anne Arundel County also has 150 apprentices. A lot of that is thanks to an agreement with the NSA. They have a large partnership there. St. Mary's, Baltimore County, Howard, Hartford are all have a strong number of apprentices participating, as well as everyone else across the state. Looking at the industries of where our apprentices participate, again, with that partnership with NSA, we have a number of youth apprentices participating in government, as well as education. And then we also have construction, manufacturing, healthcare as strong industry sectors with a number of apprentices. But it really does stretch across a number of different areas here, as we can see down towards the bottom of the list. We have got communications, finance and banking, transportation. So this really can, take on many different shapes and sizes within the specific employer, the specific occupation. With that in mind, though, one thing that's definitely top of mind for the CTE committee is really making sure that all of these experiences are beneficial to the student as they move forward. And we want to make sure that we have that connection between the industry credential that they earn, the apprenticeship that they participate in, and what those employers are looking for after that next step. So this research report looked at, and what are those nationwide, what are those credentials that high school students are earning, and what are the credentials that employers are asking for. And this found that only 18% of those credentials that high school students are earning are demanded by the employers, whereas many of them that high school students are earning are not in demand and really do not lead to that living wage. And so we want to, again, the big takeaway here is making sure that we are supporting our students to participate in these CTE programs, but making sure that there is that alignment, that everything is productive and a good match for everyone involved. And so with that, turn over to Dr. Collins, who talk a little bit more about that student experience.
Great. Thank you, Phil. So we've spent a lot of time with you this afternoon, sharing a lot of technical information, background information, context. And now we just want to close out by talking about, so what does all this mean in terms of the day-to-day, the lived experiences from students? Because at the end of the day, this is what all of this work that we've talked about is supposed to do. So I'm going to share a few spotlights and sample schedules from students. So if we look at what's happening in Dorchester County, as an example, a student may be taking English and math at Chesapeake College on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then work at the apprenticeship the remainder of the week. The student may also have the opportunity to play volleyball in the fall and then softball in the spring. Student B attends a computer-aided drafting design program Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at Dorchester Career and Technology Center in the morning, 8 to 10:30. And on Tuesday and Thursday, they report directly to the apprenticeship site at 8 a.m. Then they take their core classes at the high school, Monday through Friday from 11:10 to 12:30. And then depending on the project that they're working on at the apprenticeship location, this really, again, is student-centered. So they may return to the work site in the afternoon, or their mentor may allow them to work remotely just to conserve gas. Another example, in Frederick County, students have 4 classes each day as part of a semester block schedule. So most students follow a schedule where in the morning, they attend blocks 1 and 2 from 7:30 to 10:30 a.m. And then in the well, not so much in the afternoon, but I'll say they're at the apprenticeships for blocks 3 and 4 And that continues after the school day as well. So from 11 a.m. through the end of the workday. The exact schedule depends on the individual student and the employer. So the expectation is to be at the job site at least 3 hours a day for each day. And so that collaboration between the employer and the student and the school is really, really important. Another example, in Howard County, students there typically attend work first thing in the morning. So from 6 to 11 a.m., they would attend school and then go to their high school for English and math courses in the afternoon. Alternatively, students will go to school first and then go to work. So it really could depend. As I mentioned, on the student and the employer, and then students also have the option to take their graduation requirement at Howard Community College. Next slide. In St. Mary's schedule, pretty similar. I won't read through this, but once again, just to note that overall, the student schedules are really individualized, which is great, so that they can have the best student experience possible. And it's really, really important that the school, the employer, and the students are working together in the best interest of the students. Next slide. So in considering schedules, one of the things that's really, really important is for us all collectively to really think about how to reimagine student schedules so that they can have the best student experience. The examples that I shared allow for flexibility for the student, and also show how the school and the student can work together so that the apprenticeship experience can happen. We definitely want to look at policies in Maryland that would be supportive of LEAs to be creative and very strategic in order to scale up these apprenticeship opportunities, and also maximize the amount of time that students can be successful to complete their high school expectations. So MSDE and the state board, we are really committed to looking at our policies across this landscape to help make this happen. Some of the innovative ideas that we've discussed with LEAs is looking at the length of a course, offering virtual classes, synchronously or asynchronously, looking at scheduling courses outside of the student's normal day. Again, that coordination with community colleges, encouraging working at the apprenticeship during the weekend, maybe, only if that's appropriate, hiring apprentices at the LEA, like the central office level, and then earning maybe high school credit over the summer. So those are just some of the options that we have talked about exploring. So in terms of some, just a few student spotlights, here's one from Anne Arundel County. We have 3 students here, Leah, Savannah, and then we also have Jackson. So Leah is completing an apprenticeship program through the Center of Applied Technology, focused on their North Welding program. And it's focusing on being a welder for the U.S. Coast Guard. And her responsibilities include maintaining the Coast Guard ships, fixing the hull, welding in the new items, and building up the ship's floors to prevent any damage. Leah will graduate in May and is really excited about her future with the Coast Guard. Savannah is completing a carpentry program, and that's through the Center of Applied Technology South. She's working for a hard yacht yard, and she uses various tools to construct, to repair and install different flooring for the boats. And she too will graduate in 2023. And she plans actually to stay working in this program once she graduates. And then we have Jackson, who completed an apprenticeship with Toyota right here, Toyota of Annapolis, through the Center of Applied Technology's North Auto Technology program. And as an entry-level technician, Jackson provides preventive maintenance, some small repairs, and works to do some diagnostic equipment as well. He will also graduate in 2023 and plans on staying in the auto industry to become a technician. So that's very exciting to hear for those students. Also, we love to spotlight employers as well. So Dynamic Auto is a business, just like others, that need highly educated workers, and is looking to find them. And so they came on board in 2016 as part of the registered apprenticeship program, and they were just hooked. They've been advocates. So Dynamic Duo works with Frederick County Public Schools to get a pool of candidates, and then they interview and they hire them as well. The program started as part of the Youth Apprenticeship Program, the Apprenticeship Maryland program, also known as Youth Apprenticeship Program. And it was so successful that they went back to the Department of Labor, and it's become a registered apprenticeship program. So that's awesome. And so the students can graduate, and then they go away for senior week, and then they can come back and participate in a registered apprenticeship for 2 more years. So they have played a critical role in increasing the pipeline. And we're so excited that this employer is supporting the student experience around apprenticeships. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Gary Williams to close us out, just to share some highlights of what's happening in particular in Washington County.
Well, thank you, Dr. Collins, MSDE Team CTE Committee. It's a pleasure to be here and highlight some of the work that we are doing in Washington County. As we advance through these slides, I would start by just simply saying that our success of our apprenticeship program really has taken off over the past 2 years. And it's been a commitment by our local Board of Education to hire an apprenticeship coordinator. The work that LEAs have to do, working with businesses, working with the Department of Labor, working with MSDE. This is something that because of this position, we really think that we were able to see exponential growth in the apprenticeship program. I would be hesitant to not mention, or if I didn't mention, the strength of our CTE programs as you advance to the next slide. Strong apprenticeship programs begin with strong CTE programs. That's essential. And, you know, I think Mr. Lasser mentioned earlier the local advisory groups. That's essential. When we started our diesel technician program, it was because there's an extreme shortage in our community of diesel technicians. And so it was easy to put that program together with our businesses, and all of the students that go through that program are going to have the opportunity to become apprenticeships or apprentices in an apprenticeship program. And so it's that type of work that we do with our community through those local advisory committee meetings that create the buy-in. Because when your employers are involved in your CTE programs, it's very easy to get them to come on board as apprentice employers and take on apprenticeships, because they helped create the curriculum, they helped create the program. As you can see on this slide, we're involved in a number of different occupations. And again, all of these tie back to the one pager you saw on the previous slide that represent our different programs. If we keep advancing the slides, you will see what we think, again, is that key of having the apprenticeship coordinator that will host and attend those community events, that work with your students on recruitment, your counselors, principals. Oftentimes, there are lots of different wonderful programs beyond CTE, our dual credit, our AP, our IB programs, and our community members aren't always aware of those. So working with MSDE, working with the Department of Labor, working with local school systems, just to make sure that our students and our parents and our community members know about some of the wonderful programs that exist. So your apprenticeship coordinator is a huge part of that. And then also, I would say, providing that excellent customer service to our employers. The Department of Labor has made it very easy to become an apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship employer, but it's still something that's new for many employers. And so our apprenticeship coordinator is always working with our employers to complete that Maryland Department of Labor application process, but then also to make sure that we're creating the right marketing materials to recruit the right students. And so what are those prerequisites that we want students to have as they enter into an apprenticeship? And so if we keep going to the next slide, I would, again, I think I touched on some of this, the student recruitment and retention piece, but we've had to use school recruitment fairs. Our CTE supervisor is fantastic and will often go out and meet with students. We have community nights where if you're interested in an apprenticeship, but you're not sure which one's a fit for you, students and their parents are able to come up, meet with our CTE supervisor, our counselor, our apprenticeship coordinator. The targeted instruction is key. In many cases, we find that our employers want students to have some type of instruction prior to an apprenticeship. That's not always the case, but in most cases, some instruction. They're fully prepared to take on and train the student. That's obviously part of it. But some of that background knowledge is crucial, depending again on the industry or the job that you're looking at. I would say, again, major part of Blueprint is that counseling component, working with, in our case, the Western Maryland Consortium, who's our economic partner. We've got to make sure we're working with students on that individualized planning. And an apprenticeship is unique to each student. And so it's crucial to make sure that we're looking at transcripts and to Dr. Collins's what she shared, that we're providing flexible scheduling options. That is key. And again, so that we have to look at this in a way that students have opportunities to both complete their formal high school education, whatever classes that may be still needed in order to graduate, but also opportunities to go out and look at that apprenticeship as a credit where I can go and I can continue to learn in the career that I hope to enter after I graduate. These are examples. I would just simply say that our scheduling options are very similar to the slides that Dr. Collins shared earlier. We're very creative. We take advantage of our wonderful partnership with Hagerstown Community College. We take advantage of virtual classes. We take advantage of evening high. We take advantage of our high school schedule, which allows principals to block and unblock classes as needed based on their student population. And therefore our students, again, every schedule could look a little different depending on the individual needs of that student and the employer and what time the employer needs them to be there. I think of the last slide that I have for you was highlighting a couple of our program processes. Again, I'm going to just probably skip over some of this, but I think one of the most successful components of our apprenticeship program is that onboarding, working with the student, the employer, and just making sure that communication is there. And I think, oftentimes we bring the parent in, we bring the student in, we bring the employer together, and we're making sure that everybody understands who's responsible for each component of the apprenticeship. Retention is huge for us. We are always doing surveys with both our employers that are involved in the apprenticeship program, but we also solicit student feedback. We want our students to learn while they're participating. And so those monthly assessment surveys, our check-ins, our site visits are crucial. And if something's not working, we're able to make that adjustment and not let a situation fester or not be productive for either the student or the employer. If we go to the next slide, I do want to just briefly talk a little bit about the financial implications. A big part of apprenticeship is removing barriers. And for us, we wanted to make sure that any student in our system had the ability to participate. And so what does that mean? Well, sometimes it means that we have to take care of uniforms or equipment for a student before they enter the site. Sometimes we can do that. Sometimes the employer can do that. We found transportation to be a barrier for some students, and we took advantage of a grant that allowed us to offer driver's ed to our students and pay for that driver's ed training. Cost for employers. We partnered with the Western Maryland Consortium, and right now our employers actually have the ability to apply for wage reimbursement through the Western Maryland Consortium, which is huge, right? Our employers are already getting a lot of benefits for being able to invest in their future workforce. But for some employers, the extra cost of an apprenticeship, this Wage reimbursement up to 75% has been huge and has allowed some of our smaller employers to take on apprentices. And then time and investment to mentor and train. And what I wanted to share earlier, the mentoring component of this is huge. Students, we have to remember, we're still working with high school students. And high school students out in the workforce is a wonderful thing. But high school students are still sometimes a little different than our college graduates or our young adults. And so they need that additional support. And the mentoring component between the employer and the student is absolutely crucial. And that's part of that responsibility and those check-ins that we've talked about earlier. The cost for us was, again, I have a great superintendent, Dr. Sovine, and a wonderful board of education that invested in an apprenticeship coordinator, which made this possible. We've had to use additional staff to pay for summer high school courses, and we've taken advantage of ESSER funds to be able to do that. And then WCPS has also had the ability to hire apprentices. Currently, I thank Mr. Dayhoff and again, the whole MSDE team for the Maryland Leads grant and opportunity. We have 32 high school teaching apprentices. These are students that have an interest in possibly becoming educators, whether that's teachers or paraprofessionals. They've been trained in the science of reading, and they work for us, and they go out and they tutor and provide supplemental instruction in our elementary schools, which has been wonderful. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, you want to get a student excited about entering the field, especially education, let them go out and help teach a young student how to read and watch that student progress. And you will get excited very quickly, and you'll walk away feeling pretty amazed by what you saw. But the high school students have done an amazing job working with our youngest students, our elementary students. So that's fantastic, and we're very grateful for the MSDE leads to be able to provide that. And then I think is truly the last slide. Sorry about that. The WCPS student apprentices. And just like you saw earlier from Frederick County, I think, and St. Mary's County, we've had some wonderful stories. We have students that work at Meredith Health. Again, our reading tutor apprenticeship program, HVAC program. Some of these students are going to be going off to college when they graduate, but they are in some cases potentially having some of their college paid for because the hope is that they'll go back to the company that they're currently working with, which again is fantastic. Others have been offered jobs, and as soon as they graduate, they're going to be full-time. In fact, we have a senior second semester that I believe is full-time right now because they finished their English and math final requirements in the fall. And so again, it's been a wonderful program. And I'm glad and thankful for Dr. Sovine, Dr. Boyd Michael, and our Board of Education for investing in it.
Thank you, Mike. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you guys very much. I'll take it. It's Myra. Thank you so much. It was so incredibly helpful. I know for me personally, and I'm sure for the rest of the CTE committee. So I'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions that you'd like to direct to our colleagues here from MSDE. I actually have a question. I'll start while folks are thinking about this. So it's really impressive the progress that has been made in terms of increasing the number, just from a rate change perspective, increasing the number of apprenticeships that we have students in over the last year or two. From your perspective, I mean, and we have a very ambitious goal, right? To get to 45% by 2030. What are the most significant barriers that we as a committee should be thinking about in terms of our ability as a state to hit that goal? Sorry to give you a big question out of the gate, but I think it's an important one.
Sorry, you cut off just for a second. Was that directed toward me?
Anyway, I think any of you could answer that question.
I actually think, Gary, it would be fine for you to speak because this is a lived experience for you. I was going to share based on what I've heard from LEAs, and my team could share too, but I think it would be great to hear from the lived experiences from an LEA.
Well, thank you, Dr. Collins, for the opportunity to respond. Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One, the apprenticeship coordinator working with school systems to make sure that they're able to put that into their budget. Again, we used grant funds to start it, which was great. Every school system is a little different across the state with whether or not they can create that position and maintain that position. So I think that's part of it. I also would say it has to be still flexible and individualized for students. And so I would caution against restrictions because this isn't a one-size-fits-all program. This will look very different for each of our students. And it does take that time and that investment. You're investing in, each student individually to make sure that apprenticeship works, right? And that takes time, it takes resources, but it also takes flexibility. Some students might have 3 or 4 classes already completed, and others may not have started any of their coursework in related instruction, right? And so again, I think that flexibility is key as you're working with students, employers, LEAs, and that we're partnering together to help move students forward. But I absolutely believe those goals can be met at 45% if we work as a team.
That's great. Thank you.
Myra, the only thing that I would say to add is to what Gary said is he talked about looking at, not a one size fits all as it applies to the schools. I think looking at the LEAs as well, not a one size fits all across the board for LEAs, understanding the local context for each LEA, where they're located, and it's kind of like a gap analysis, right? Like, when we look across the state, where are there gaps? Where is it plenty? I think those are things that the CTE committee will need to unpack. And as they develop sort of a plan for and a roadmap to hitting that 45% as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, I think of, part of our work is to really identify what those barriers are at whatever level, whether it's at the individual, both statewide and at the individual LEA level, and put together a plan that helps remove those barriers, because everything I've heard is everyone is fully behind getting this done. So it's not like we have to persuade folks. We just need to figure out how to help remove those barriers.
And I think it's worth calling out to one of those barriers is also making sure that we've got the slots, right? Making sure that if we've got the spaces to fill with industry, right, to get kids in and get them access to those programs.
Yeah, that was one of my questions and thoughts that how much is one of the barriers, making sure you have enough apprenticeship slots in a given area of the state, and making sure we've got the level of participation we need from employers. I would imagine that's one of the things that we have to really look at. Okay, Bob, I see your hand up. Did you have a question? And if you're talking, you're on mute.
Thank you, Myra, and thank you to the team from MSDE. I learned a lot as well. I do think that this last point is critical, getting enough slots and figuring out a mechanism by which the outreach to employers takes place. So I was wondering what suggestions you had. That's one question. For what suggestions you have for a mechanism to reach out to employers to achieve those slots. But my other question is a little more technical about data on following students who are CTE completers and those that got industry recognized credentials. Do you have data on how many of them are in what we would call training-related employment? So 2 questions. 1, what do you suggest for a mechanism to achieve the slots? And 2, what data do you have on post high school training related employment?
So I'm happy to jump in on the first one. And the local education agencies alone can't, be the sole bearer of the responsibility to reach out to establish those industry aligned programs and to do that work. And so one strategy you see in different ways is often the use of an intermediary in order to engage both regional industry or statewide industry, right? They don't have to be statewide, they can be, but to allow for alignment between the business sector and where the jobs are, what kind of jobs are coming, what they need, where the pipelines need to be for them, and to then have that intermediary there who can say, okay, well then now that we know that, let's work with you, let's work with your employers, and let's work with our school systems, and let's work most, of course, with the Department of Labor to make sure that we can get this all together, we can be in alignment, that we can launch these programs, do it the right way, follow the process, and have a repeatable process because the economy is going to change, the labor market's going to change. And so having that feedback process with chambers of commerce, with the broader group of stakeholders to make sure that that's not just a one-time correction and alignment, but that we are constantly sustaining that work and having that group or that essentially force to have that conversation. I will defer to Chandra, but again, just to reinforce that too gets you those extra slots, right? Because it gets you the alignment. It also gets you the opportunity to identify more employers, to support them, to increase opportunities, to do that in conjunction with the local education agencies, and to also, kind of economize on scale in some ways, because while we have county lines here in Maryland, and we are big, and geographically in jurisdictions, there is still, joint collaborative work to be done and to capitalize on. But I will defer to my colleagues on some of the data, probably Chandra specifically, I'm guessing.
So one of the challenges with data is that we have quite a bit of data for the students when they're in our K-12 schools. So we know the CTE programs, the course sequences, the work-based learning, what tests they are taking and earning credentials for. But once they leave the building, that tracking of data may be limited, primarily because they're no longer reporting back to the school, and the school is no longer accountable for that, knowing that data. So one of the questions I have for you is that, just for clarification, are you referring to data for, like, a student is enrolled in a post-secondary training opportunity after they graduate from high school? And are they there for an extended period of time? And are they successful? And what is the feedback in regards to that next step that student is taking after they leave post high school? That is something that we would more than likely need to reach out to other agencies to build that feedback loop so that we can get that data and complete that picture.
Well, yeah. Well, 2 things. One, I was interested in, they've attained an industry recognized credential.
Yes.
Do they go into that industry? That's
Yes.
the one question. But I certainly, with response to my first question, I do agree that you're going to need intermediaries to go out and recruit employers. So I'm glad you're thinking in that direction. That's what I'm thinking of as well. But I meant people going into similar industries. Of course, some will go to higher ed directly and continue studying in that field.
That's helpful clarification. Thank you. So that is information that's available with our P20 workforce data system. They have our CTE completers, their industry credentials, whether they've participated in apprenticeships, what credentials they've earned. And then they have workforce data at that P20 workforce system. And we can develop reporting mechanisms working with the P20 workforce system to create a sustainable reporting process to make sure we monitor that specific information. Student earns a credential in this industry. Do they actually go on to work in that industry and or work and earn wages in that industry? There are limitations to workforce data, but we can make that initial or develop the initial reporting mechanisms to develop that out.
And
Great.
Mr. Lerman, just to add to what Justin said, our school systems also work with the Chamber of Commerce is another avenue, as well as the local workforce development boards. Gary, do you want to very quickly, maybe 1 minute, talk about your collaboration with the local workforce development board? Because that is another very authentic way to put the word out.
Yeah, I think you definitely need partners in this. The local workforce development board, in our case, the Western Maryland Consortium, has been a great partner from the start. The Chamber of Commerce has been a great partner from the start. Our Greater Hagerstown Committee. You go, again, if they're part of your CTE committees, flipping them on into the apprenticeship mode and getting them on board as employers is very, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's easier when they're already involved in your CTE program. So it's taking advantage of those relationships and resources you have in your community.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, I see Ting's hand and Matt. So Ting, you want to go first? We've got about 5 minutes left. So just to be mindful of time.
Thanks very much, Myra. I will try to be quick. I have 3 quick questions, a kind of little bit follow up. One is with Justin, you mentioned about this job information. I'm kind of wondering whether there is some kind of job posting board or job information switchboard somehow statewide or localized. Gary maybe can give some insights. And for Chandra, you mentioned about the data. Yes, P20 data can be useful. And also to further address Bob's question. And by the way, I'm from Jacob Friends Institute. So we work with the Maryland Department of Labor. So we have decades of workforce data. So, we would be really happy to work with MSDE to further diagnose in this particular historical trend more than just a few quarters beyond, the graduate, so that we can see what kind of, what the paths are in later on, have more details information. And my third question is to Gary. You mentioned about, very interesting, the example you illustrated. And you mentioned about they have different paths. Some stay, with the same employer, right, become formal full-time employee, and some goes to college. I kind of wondering whether you have some vague information or impression. What's the percentage distribution just at the moment when they graduate? What for those CTE, people who participate in the CTE program, will they pass on in completers, in where they stay with employer, or they stay in a similar job right after high school, or go to college? It's kind of interesting, that data set, whether you have any, for first-hand information. Thank you very much.
I think I was first up on that list there, and I'll say, I don't know offhand. I would have to get back to you on access to a statewide CTE or especially apprenticeship job board. I'm not sure if our colleagues at Labor or my other colleagues on the call would have a better answer than that. I don't, and I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction.
We have a website that I can gladly share with you where we keep all of our apprenticeship employers' job postings open. It's a one-stop shop for our employers, our parents, our students, our counselors, all of our stakeholders that are involved in the program. And then what I would just simply say, I can't give you firm statistics today, but the ones that are going off to college tend to be in the medical related fields. Those that may have earned their CNA and now want to go on into nursing or other fields, those that are in our diesel or some of our carpentry electrical programs are actually staying with their employers. We have one employer that started and now I believe has 9 graduates working full time, and then he is in the trucking business. And so those are the diesel technicians that I was mentioning earlier.
Thank you, Gary. And Matt, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Myra. I'm actually looking for a little bit of background history on this. I'm wondering why the CTE completers aren't counted towards the 45% goal. I believe in Kerwin they were, but when it became the blueprint, they were removed. And I'm just thinking for an industry such as agriculture, where it may be difficult to get the credentials, it would be advantageous for both the goal and for the industry to be able to utilize the CTE completers towards the end goal.
I think you've asked a question that maybe we don't know the exact answer to. So I'm not going to pretend to know here the details, Mike. I don't know if you have a sense for
Bob, do you want to take a shot at it from a technical perspective, and I can kind of give a broader perspective if you'd like.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. That this is what the legislature came up with, and
Bob, let me the one who knows.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Let me take a shot at this. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think, Matt, the idea here is CTE completer is really about completing coursework in a given, if I have that correct, in a given industry, and the intention here is to have on the job train, to have folks working in apprenticeships, so they have the actual, tactical experience of working on the job. So I think it's not so much about we're saying that the form of industry credential that is preferred is the completion of a registered apprenticeship, of the high school portion of a registered apprenticeship. So does that sound right to everyone, that's the intention here, is to really get that on the job experience for students? I'm seeing a lot of head nods.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And I would too. I mean, and the bottom line is making sure that the skills-based learning that we're getting that they're getting in school is actually leads to the job in the profession, and a job in the profession that they're actually getting the skills for. That's the idea. So they're not just I think part of the legislation was so that people aren't just getting a CTE certification and not winding up in a job for what the skill is that they actually got the training for. And so I think they're trying to align the skills that they're getting in the classroom with the job that they have to move forward. That's kind of where the 45% kind of came in.
Does that help, Matt?
It does. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. Yeah, and actually one of the stats that you guys shared struck me, the something, I'm going to get this wrong now, but like 18%, it was only sort of 18% of the industry recognized credentials actually led to a job or something. I'm sure I'm not quoting that exactly right, but it's the point. The point is that you can have students that earn these credentials, and that's great, but if those credentials don't lead to employment, then we're not getting the end result that we want.
That's correct.
Okay, and we are right on time to wrap up. Thank you all so much for your participation, and all of the folks from MSDE. This was so incredibly helpful. We're really grateful for your time and the preparation that you put into this, so thank you. And just a reminder for folks that our next two meetings, February 16th at 12:30 and March 7th at 12:30. And then you can connect with the CTE committee at the email below, and then you have our YouTube channel there if you want to review any of the recorded sessions, etc. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.